Chinese woman tied to a chair in the frozen town square, a whip raised high, a crowd screaming for blood. This is the moment Meilin Zhao's world catches fire, but it's also the moment a scarred stranger steps out of a snowstorm and changes everything. What happens next will turn a frontier town inside out, spark a manhunt across the wilderness, and prove that some people refuse to be broken no matter how hard the world tries. Stay with me until the end, hit that like button, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from so I can see how far this story travels. The rope cut into Meilin Zhao's wrists like wire through skin. She'd stopped struggling 20 minutes ago when Marshal Gideon Rourke yanked the binding so tight her fingers went numb. Now she just sat there in the punishment chair they'd dragged into the center of Black Creek Ridge's main square, breathing shallow clouds into the winter air while her body shook, not entirely from the cold. The chair itself was a crude thing. Wooden, heavy, built specifically for this kind of public spectacle. Dark stains marked the armrests where previous occupants had bled. Or worse. Meilin tried not to think about that, tried not to think about much of anything except the fact that she was 24 years old and about to be whipped in front of 200 people for the crime of being hungry. "Thief!" The shout came from somewhere in the crowd. A woman's voice, sharp with righteous anger that felt rehearsed. Others picked it up like a chant. "Thief! Thief! Thief!" Meilin kept her eyes down. Her black hair hung loose around her face, still damp from the snow that had been falling when they caught her behind the stables. The thin silk dress she wore, one of the few things she'd brought from San Francisco before everything fell apart, was torn at the shoulder and covered in mud. Someone had thrown her coat over her at some point, a grudging concession to the fact that letting her freeze to death would rob them of their entertainment. She could see their boots, dozens of them, forming a rough circle around the chair, work boots caked in horse manure and frontier mud. Women's shoes that cost more than Meilin had seen in 6 months. Children's feet shuffling in the snow, their parents holding them close so they could witness what happened to people who didn't belong. "Look at me when I'm talking to you," Gideon's voice. Meilin forced her head up. The marshal stood directly in front of her, 6 feet of weathered muscle and territorial meanness wrapped in a long coat with a star pinned to the chest. His face was all hard angles, sharp jaw, thin lips, eyes the color of dirty ice. He'd shaved recently but missed a spot near his ear where gray stubble caught the late afternoon light. In his right hand, he held a whip. It wasn't the kind they used on animals, too deliberate for that. Someone had braided the leather specifically for human skin, with a weighted tip designed to split flesh on the first stroke. Meilin had seen one before, back in San Francisco, used on a man who'd stolen from the wrong merchant. He'd carried the scars until the day he died. "You understand what you did?" Gideon asked. Meilin said nothing. Her English was good, better than most immigrants who'd arrived in the last 5 years, but she'd learned that speaking only gave people more reasons to hate her accent. "I asked you a question." Gideon stepped closer. "You understand what you did?" "I was hungry." The words came out quieter than she intended. "Speak up." "I was hungry," Meilin repeated, louder this time. "I took scraps from behind the stables, food they were throwing away, food that didn't belong to you, food that was garbage." The backhand came fast, not hard enough to knock her unconscious, just enough to snap her head sideways and fill her mouth with the copper taste of blood. The crowd made a sound halfway between a gasp and a cheer. "You don't get to decide what's garbage in my town," Gideon said. His voice stayed level, almost conversational. That was worse somehow. "You don't get to decide anything. You're here because we allow it. You eat because we allow it. And when you steal, even trash, you get punished because that's how civilization works." Civilization. The word sat bitter in Meilin's bleeding mouth. She'd been in Black Creek Ridge for 3 months, ever since the railroad work dried up, and the man who'd promised to help her find employment disappeared with her money. 3 months of sleeping in an abandoned mining shack on the edge of town. 3 months of washing clothes for pennies that barely bought bread. 3 months of enduring looks that made her feel like something diseased. This wasn't civilization. This was a pack of wolves who'd found someone weaker to tear apart. 10 lashes, Gideon announced, turning to address the crowd. Public punishment for theft and disrespect of property. Anyone objects? Silence. Not the thoughtful kind. The eager kind, heavy with anticipation. Maylin's breath came faster. Her heart hammered against her ribs so hard it hurt. She wanted to beg but knew it wouldn't matter. These people didn't see her as human. They saw her as Chinese, foreign, other, a problem that needed correction. Gideon walked behind her, the whip dragged through the snow with a soft whisper. Wait. The voice cut through the square like a blade through silk, quiet, but absolute. The kind of voice that didn't need volume to command attention. Maylene lifted her head. A man stood at the edge of the crowd. Tall, maybe 40, with the build of someone who'd spent years doing hard physical labor in places that didn't forgive weakness. He wore a long coat darker than the gathering storm clouds, and his face carried the kind of scars you didn't get from bar fights, deliberate marks that spoke of violence survived rather than sought. His eyes found Maylene's across the square, gray, steady, completely unreadable. This doesn't concern you, stranger, Gideon said without turning around. Move along. The man didn't move. What'd she steal? I said move along. I heard what you said. The stranger stepped forward, and the crowd parted without anyone quite deciding to. I'm asking what she stole. Gideon finally turned, his grip tightening on the whip. You looking for trouble? I'm looking for an answer. Simple question. What'd this woman steal that deserves 10 lashes in the middle of winter? Livestock feed. From private property. Livestock feed. The stranger's tone didn't change. She eat any of it? What? Did she eat the feed? Or was she planning to sell it? Maybe start a competing stable business? The questions came flat and factual, but underneath them ran something dangerous. Because from where I'm standing, this looks like a woman who is starving and took garbage nobody wanted. That about right? A muscle jumped in Gideon's jaw. This is a matter of law. Law requires proof. You got witnesses, documentation? Or did you just decide she looked guilty and figured a public beating would keep the rest of the foreigners in line? The crowd shifted. Murmurs rippled through the onlookers, some angry, some uncertain. Maylene realized she'd been holding her breath. Who the hell are you? Gideon demanded. Name's Silas Mercer. The stranger moved closer, slow and deliberate. I mind my business when I can, but this? He gestured at Maylene tied to the chair. This isn't justice. This is a mob that found an excuse. You calling me a liar? I'm calling this what it is. Silas stopped 10 feet away. You want to punish theft? Fine. Show me evidence. Give her a trial. Do it proper. But you're not doing that, are you? You're making an example out of a woman who can't defend herself because it makes you feel powerful in front of people who already fear you. Gideon's face went red. You've got about 5 seconds to leave before I add you to the punishment list. You won't. The hell I won't. You won't, Silas repeated. Because deep down you know I'm right. And if you touch me, you'll have to explain to everyone watching why you needed a whip to handle an unarmed man asking questions. He paused. That the kind of marshal you want to be? The square went silent. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Maylene stared at this stranger, this Silas Mercer, who'd appeared out of nowhere and somehow stopped an entire town's bloodlust with nothing but words. She wanted to thank him, wanted to scream at him for drawing attention, wanted to understand why anyone would risk themselves for her. Gideon's hand trembled on the whip handle. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then the marshal smiled. It was the worst thing Maylene had seen all day. You know what? Gideon said softly. You're right. This should be done proper. He raised his voice to the crowd. Anyone here witness this woman stealing? 3 hands went up immediately, then 5, then a dozen. See that? Gideon turned back to Silas. Witnesses, plenty of them. All standing citizens of Black Creek Ridge who saw her digging through private property without permission. Still want to talk about evidence? Silas's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his posture, a subtle adjustment that made him look even more dangerous despite standing completely still. Those witnesses see her take anything, or did they just see a Chinese woman existing somewhere she wasn't wanted? Careful, Gideon warned. I'm always careful. Silas looked past the marshal to Maylene. Miss, did you take anything that didn't belong in the trash? Maylene's throat closed. She managed to shake her head. She's lying, someone shouted from the crowd. She's a thief and a... Enough. Silas's voice didn't rise, but it cut through the noise like a gunshot. He looked at Gideon again. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to untie this woman. She's going to leave town, and everybody here is going to pretend this never happened. Gideon laughed. Actually laughed. Or what? Or I'll make you untie her. The threat hung in the frozen air between them. Maylene watched Gideon's face cycle through emotions. Anger, disbelief, calculation. He was armed. He had the law behind him. He had 200 people watching who expected him to maintain control. But something in Silas's eyes made him hesitate. You threatening a lawman? Gideon asked carefully. I'm stating a fact. You can do this easy, or you can do this hard. Either way, she's walking out of here. The hell she is! Silas moved. It happened faster than Maylene could process. One moment he was standing 10 feet away. The next he was beside her chair with a knife in his hand, a hunting blade that caught the light as it sliced through the ropes binding her wrists. The crowd erupted in shouts. Gideon swung the whip, but Silas had already pulled Maylene to her feet and stepped back, putting himself between her and the marshal. Don't, Silas said quietly. Gideon froze with the whip raised. His face had gone from red to purple. You just assaulted a peace officer. I cut some rope. Nobody's bleeding yet. Silas kept his knife visible, but not threatening. Let's keep it that way. I'll have you arrested. For what? Asking questions? Pointing out you had no legal grounds for punishment? Silas's voice stayed level. Go ahead, arrest me. But you'll have to explain to a real judge why you were whipping a woman for taking garbage. See how that plays in court. Maylene's legs shook so badly she could barely stand. Silas shifted slightly, letting her lean against his shoulder without making it obvious. This isn't over, Gideon said through clenched teeth. It is today. Silas started walking backward, guiding Maylene with him. The crowd parted again, but this time the looks they gave were different, confused, angry, uncertain what came next. She's a criminal, someone yelled. She's a thief. She's leaving, Silas called back without turning around. And if anyone follows us, we're going to have a different kind of conversation. One that doesn't end with talking. They reached the edge of the square. Maylene's feet moved automatically, numb inside boots that had worn through weeks ago. She couldn't feel her toes, couldn't feel much of anything except the stranger's steady presence beside her and the weight of 200 hostile stares burning into her back. Keep walking, Silas murmured. Don't look back. They'll kill us, Maylene whispered. Probably, but not here. Not in front of witnesses they'll have to lie to later. He steered her down a side street between two buildings. We've got maybe 10 minutes before the shock wears off and someone decides to be a hero. Need to move fast. Where? My horse is behind the general store. Can you ride? Maylene nodded. She'd learned in San Francisco, though it felt like a lifetime ago. Good. We're going to get on that horse and ride until we can't see this town anymore. After that, Silas paused. After that, we figure out how to stay alive. They turned another corner. The sounds of the square faded behind them. Angry voices arguing about what to do. Gideon's shouting rising above the rest. Maylene heard her name spit like a curse. Why? She managed to ask. Silas glanced at her. Why what? Why help me? You don't know me. Don't know anything about me. I could be exactly what they said. You're not. How do you know? Because thieves don't starve. Silas kept moving, scanning the street for threats. Real thieves steal food that's worth selling, not garbage that's already been thrown out. And they sure as hell don't look as terrified as you did sitting in that chair. He shook his head. I know cruelty when I see it. That wasn't justice back there. That was entertainment. They reached the general store. Behind it, a large black horse stood tied to a post, saddlebags already packed. Silas had clearly been preparing to leave town before he'd stumbled onto the square. Can you mount? He asked. Maylene tried. Her ankle gave out immediately, sending pain shooting up her leg. She must have twisted it during the arrest and not noticed through the fear. All right. Silas caught her before she fell, then lifted her onto the horse like she weighed nothing. Hold on. He swung up behind her, gathering the reins. The horse shifted beneath them, eager to move. Wait, Maylene said suddenly. My things... Where? The mining shack, east side of town. I have... She stopped. What did she have? A blanket? A few coins? A photograph of parents she'd never see again? Nothing. I have nothing. Silas looked at her for a long moment. Then he kicked the horse into motion. They rode fast through the back streets, avoiding the main roads. The town blurred past. Storefronts she'd scrubbed, houses whose windows she'd washed, churches that hadn't let her through their doors. Black Creek Ridge had never been home, had never even pretended to welcome her. She didn't look back this time. They were a mile outside town when the first gunshot cracked through the air. Silas cursed and urged the horse faster. Maylene twisted to look behind them and saw 3 riders emerging from the town gates, their horses kicking up snow in great white clouds. "Hold on," Silas said, and the world became nothing but speed and cold wind and the terrifying rhythm of hoofbeats pounding behind them. The landscape opened into wilderness, trees heavy with snow, rocks jutting from frozen ground, ravines cutting deep into the earth. Silas guided the horse with practiced ease, taking paths that barely existed, using terrain like a weapon. Another gunshot. Closer this time. Maylin felt the bullet pass somewhere near her head with a sound like tearing fabric. "They're not trying to arrest us," she said. "No." Silas leaned forward, reducing wind resistance. "They're not." The chase became a blur of survival. They crossed a frozen stream that nearly cost them the horse when ice cracked beneath its weight. Climbed a ridge so steep Maylene had to close her eyes and trust Silas wouldn't let them fall. Plunged into a forest where branches tore at their clothes and drew blood from exposed skin. Behind them, the riders kept coming. Maylene recognized one of them, Frank Carson, who ran the stables where she'd been caught. A man who'd tried to corner her twice before with suggestions that made her skin crawl. He was shouting something, but the wind stole the words. "There," Silas said, pointing to a narrow canyon ahead. "If we can reach that before they get a clear shot." The horse screamed. Not a natural sound, a sound of pure animal pain that froze Maylene's blood. The horse stumbled, front legs buckling, and suddenly they were falling. Silas managed to twist as they went down, taking the impact across his back while shielding Maylene with his body. They hit frozen ground hard enough to knock the air from her lungs. For a moment, Maylene couldn't move, couldn't breathe, could only lie there staring at gray sky while her ribs screamed and spots danced in her vision. "Up!" Silas's voice rough with pain. "Have to get up." He pulled her to her feet. The horse was down, breathing in horrible wet gasps. Blood stained the snow beneath its shoulder where a bullet had torn through muscle. "No," Maylene whispered. Silas drew his revolver, a weapon she hadn't even noticed until now, and shot the horse once through the head. The animal went still instantly, mercifully. "I'm sorry," he said to the corpse. Then he grabbed Maylene's hand. "Run!" They ran. Mylan's ankle screamed protest with every step, but fear drove her forward. Behind them, the riders were shouting in triumph. She heard Carson's voice clearly now. "Got the horse! They're on foot!" The canyon loomed ahead, a narrow split in the rocks barely wide enough for 2 people. Silas pulled her toward it, half dragging her when she stumbled. "Stop right there!" The command came from their left. Maylene turned and saw Gideon himself riding out from behind a cluster of trees. He must have circled around while the others gave chase. His revolver was already drawn, aimed directly at them. "It's over," the marshal said. "Both of you on the ground, now." Silas put himself between Maylene and the gun. "Let her go. Your problem is with me. My problem is with lawbreakers." Gideon's horse moved closer, hooves crunching in the snow. "She's a thief. You're an accomplice. Both of you are under arrest." "Arrest?" Silas laughed without humor. "That what you're calling murder these days? You resisted, attacked an officer, stole a prisoner. I stopped an execution disguised as justice. There's a difference. Not in my town. We're not in your town anymore." Gideon smiled that terrible smile again. "My authority extends to the territorial boundary. We're still 5 miles inside it." He cocked the revolver. "Last chance. On the ground." Maylene felt Silas tense. She knew what he was thinking, the same thing she was thinking. Gideon wasn't taking them back to Black Creek Ridge. This was an execution dressed up with legal language. "All right," Silas said slowly. "We'll come peacefully." He started to lower himself to the snow, hands raised. Then he moved. Later, Maylene wouldn't be able to explain exactly what happened. It was too fast. A blur of motion that saw Silas draw and fire in the same heartbeat, his bullet taking Gideon's horse in the shoulder. The animal reared, screaming, and Gideon's shot went wild into the trees. "Go!" Silas shoved Maylin toward the canyon. "Go now!" She ran, heard more gunshots behind her, heard Silas returning fire, his revolver barking 3 times in quick succession, heard men shouting and horses crashing through undergrowth. The canyon mouth swallowed her whole. Inside, the world became stone and shadow. The passage was barely 3 feet wide, forcing her to turn sideways in places. Above, the walls rose so high the sky appeared as a thin ribbon of gray. Her breathing echoed off the rocks, mixing with the distant sounds of fighting. Then Silas was beside her, blood streaming from a cut on his forehead. "Keep moving," he gasped. "This canyon runs for half a mile, comes out near Bear Ridge. You're hurt. Keep moving." They pushed deeper into the passage. Behind them, Maylin heard men at the canyon entrance arguing about whether to follow. The walls pressed so close she could touch both sides at once. Her injured ankle finally gave out completely, and she had to lean on Silas, who was clearly in worse shape than he let on. "How did you know?" she asked between gasps for air. "About this canyon?" "I know these mountains." Silas winced as his shoulder scraped against stone. "Spent enough years hiding in them." "Hiding from what?" "Everything." The passage twisted and turned. At one point, it narrowed so severely they had to crawl. Maylin's hands went numb against the frozen stone. Her dress tore further, and the cold bit through to her skin like teeth. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit faded. Either the riders had given up, or they were taking a different route. Finally, after what felt like hours but was probably 15 minutes, the canyon opened onto a steep hillside thick with pine trees. Snow fell harder now, filling the air with white that limited visibility to a few dozen feet. Silas pulled Maylin behind a fallen log and collapsed against it, breathing hard. Blood had soaked through his coat in multiple places. "Let me see," Maylin said, reaching for the wounds. "No time." But he let her check anyway, too exhausted to argue. The cut on his forehead was superficial. The bullet graze across his ribs was worse, deep enough to bleed freely but not deep enough to be immediately fatal. His shoulder looked dislocated or badly bruised from the fall. He'd been hurt protecting her and was still moving on willpower alone. "You need a doctor," Maylin said. "Can't go to a doctor. They'll turn us in for the reward money Gideon's probably already posting." Silas pulled his coat closed, hiding the blood. "We need shelter, somewhere they won't think to look." "Where?" He pointed up the slope. "There's a cabin, 2 miles north. Nobody's used it in years. If we can reach it before dark." He didn't finish the sentence, didn't need to. If they didn't reach shelter before dark in this snowstorm, they'd freeze. Maylin helped him to his feet. They started climbing. The next 2 hours tested everything Maylin had left. Her ankle was useless. Silas was fading fast, his weight growing heavier against her shoulder with each step. The snow deepened until they were wading through drifts that reached their knees. More than once, Silas stumbled and nearly brought them both down. More than once, Maylin wanted to stop and rest, just for a moment, just until the burning in her legs subsided. But stopping meant dying. So they kept moving. The cabin appeared out of the storm like a ghost, a small structure built against the mountain itself, barely visible beneath accumulated snow. The door hung crooked on rusted hinges. One window was broken, but it was shelter. Silas pushed the door open with his good shoulder, and they stumbled inside. The interior was a single room, maybe 12 feet square. An old iron stove sat in one corner, its chimney disappearing into the ceiling. A broken chair lay against one wall. Years of dirt and animal droppings covered the floor. It was the most beautiful thing Maylin had ever seen. "Fire," Silas managed before he collapsed onto the floor. "Need fire." Maylin found wood stacked against the back wall, probably left by the last person to use the cabin. Her hand shook so badly she could barely hold the matches Silas pulled from his coat, but eventually she got the stove lit. Heat began to fill the small space, weak at first, then stronger. She turned to Silas and found him unconscious, his breathing shallow and rapid. The blood loss had finally caught up with him. Maylin knelt beside the man who'd saved her life twice in the same day and tried not to cry. She'd escaped Black Creek Ridge, survived the chase, made it to shelter. But Silas was dying, and she had no idea how to save him. Outside, the storm howled like something alive. The wind found every crack in the cabin walls, filling the room with cold drafts that made the stove flame flicker. Maylene used what little strength she had left to drag Silas closer to the heat. His coat was ruined, torn and bloody, and soaked through. She managed to get it off him and saw the full extent of his injuries. The bullet graze was worse than she'd thought. The shoulder was definitely dislocated, and there were older scars beneath, dozens of them, crisscrossing his torso like a map of violence survived. This was a man who'd been hurt before, many times. Maylene tore strips from her already ruined dress and did her best to bandage the worst wounds. Her hands remembered movements her mother had taught her years ago in China, before the family lost everything, before the desperate journey to America, before the world became nothing but survival. When she finished, Silas's breathing had evened out slightly. Not good, but better. She collapsed beside him, finally letting the exhaustion win. Her last thought before sleep took her was that she didn't even know this man's full story. Didn't know why he'd helped her. Didn't know what demons had driven him into these mountains alone, but he'd risked everything for a stranger. That had to mean something. Maylene closed her eyes and let the warmth of the fire carry her into darkness, not knowing if either of them would wake up. Outside, somewhere in the storm, men with guns and authority and hatred searched for them both. The hunt had only just begun. Maylene woke to the sound of breathing that wasn't hers. For a disoriented moment, she thought she was back in the mining shack in Black Creek Ridge, that everything, the chair, the escape, the stranger, had been some fever dream born of hunger and cold. Then pain shot through her ankle, and the previous day crashed back into focus with brutal clarity. The cabin, the storm, Silas dying on the floor beside her. She jerked upright, ignoring the protest from her body, and found him still unconscious but breathing steadily. The fire in the stove had burned down to coals. Gray morning light filtered through the broken window, and the storm outside had quieted to occasional gusts that rattled the walls. Maylene's entire body ached. Her hands were raw from climbing through the canyon. Her ankle had swollen to twice its normal size. The cold had settled into her bones so deeply she wondered if she'd ever feel warm again. But she was alive. She fed more wood into the stove, coaxing the flames back to life, then checked Silas's bandages. Blood had seeped through during the night, but not as much as she'd feared. His face was pale, covered in stubble that made him look older than he probably was. Up close, she could see the scars more clearly. A thin line across his left cheek, another along his jaw, several smaller ones disappearing into his hairline. This was a man who'd survived things that should have killed him. "You planning to stare all morning, or are you going to check if I'm still breathing?" Maylene jumped. Silas's eyes were open, gray and alert, despite the pain she could see tightening the corners of his mouth. "You're awake," she said stupidly. "Disappointed?" No, I thought you might not." She trailed off. "Die?" Silas tried to sit up, failed, and settled for propping himself against the wall with a grimace. "Takes more than a bullet graze to kill me. Though I'll admit, yesterday came close. You were shot protecting me. I was shot because Gideon's a bastard with poor aim." He looked around the cabin, assessing. "How long was I out?" "All night, maybe 12 hours. Storm?" "Stopped an hour ago." Silas cursed quietly. "They'll start searching again once the snow clears enough to see tracks." "Can you ride?" Maylene asked, then realized how absurd the question was. "Never mind, you can barely sit up." "I can ride if I have to. Question is what we're riding." He gestured vaguely toward the door. "My horse is dead. Town's 5 miles south, and every able-bodied man in Black Creek Ridge is probably out here looking for us by now." "So what do we do?" Silas studied her for a long moment. "You keep saying we. What we? What do we do? Like you're planning to stick around." He shifted position, wincing. "You don't owe me anything. I made my choice yesterday. You're free now. Could head north on foot, find another town, start over somewhere they don't know your face." Maylene felt something hot and angry rise in her chest. "You think I'd just leave you here? After what you did?" "Wouldn't blame you if you did." "Well, I won't, so stop suggesting it." The corner of Silas's mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. "Stubborn." "I'm alive because you were stubborn first." Maylene stood, testing her ankle. It held her weight if she didn't put too much pressure on it. "There has to be something useful in this cabin. Food, supplies, anything. She searched while Silas watched. The cabin yielded little: a rusted knife with half the blade missing, a tin cup with a hole in the bottom, a moth-eaten blanket that fell apart when she touched it. But in a box shoved under what remained of a bed frame, she found a small sack of cornmeal that mice hadn't completely destroyed, and a jar of something that might have been preserves years ago. "Better than nothing," Silas said when she showed him. "We can make flatbread from the cornmeal if we're careful with it." "How long will it last?" 3 days if we ration, maybe 4. He leaned his head back against the wall. "There's a trading post 8 miles northeast, place called Willowbrook. If we can make it there before Gideon figures out which direction we went." 8 miles? With you barely able to stand and me with a ruined ankle." Maylene shook her head. "We'll never make it. Not today, but maybe tomorrow. Or the day after." Silas met her eyes. "I'm not giving up. And based on yesterday, neither are you." They spent the rest of the morning in careful silence. Maylene mixed the cornmeal with melted snow and cooked crude flatbread on the stove's hot surface. It tasted like paste mixed with desperation, but her stomach had stopped caring about flavor days ago. Silas managed to relocate his own shoulder, a process that involved him biting down on a piece of wood while he slammed his arm against the wall. The sound it made when the joint popped back into place turned Maylene's stomach. He didn't make a sound beyond one sharp exhale, but sweat poured down his face afterward. "You've done that before," Maylene observed. "Once or twice." Silas tested his range of motion carefully. "Had a sergeant in the war who taught me. Said soldiers who couldn't fix themselves were just corpses waiting to happen." "You were a soldier." His expression shuddered. "Long time ago." Maylene wanted to ask more, but recognized the wall that had just gone up between them. She'd built enough walls herself to know when to stop pushing. By midday, they heard the first sounds of the search party. Distant voices carried on the wind, men calling to each other across the slopes. Maylene moved to the window carefully and saw nothing but trees and snow, but the sounds grew slowly closer. "They're spreading out," Silas said quietly from his position against the wall. "Probably in groups of 3 or 4, covering as much ground as they can before dark. Will they find us? Depends on whether they're smart enough to check old cabins." He reached for his revolver, empty now, she realized. He'd used all his ammunition during the chase. "You know how to shoot?" "No." "Then stay behind me if they come through that door." The voices grew closer. Maylene could make out individual words now, cursing about the cold, complaints about wasting time. One man wondering aloud if they should just give up and let the wilderness handle the problem. Then Frank Carson's voice cut through the rest. "Marshall wants them alive. Said there's an extra $100 for whoever brings them back breathing." Another voice. "What's he want with a half-dead mountain man and a Chinese whore anyway? Don't ask stupid questions, just search every structure within 10 miles. They couldn't have gotten far on foot." Maylene felt Silas tense beside her. The voices were maybe 200 yards away now, close enough that she could hear boots crunching through snow. "Under the bed," Silas whispered. "Whatever's left of it, hide there and don't make a sound." "What about you?" "I'll handle it." "You can't even stand." "Maylene." He looked at her directly. "If they find us, they'll kill me and do worse to you. Your best chance is if they don't see you at all. So please, hide." She wanted to argue, wanted to tell him she wasn't going to cower while he faced armed men alone. But the practical part of her brain, the part that had kept her alive through 3 months of hell in Black Creek Ridge, knew he was right. Maylene crawled under the collapsed bed frame, pressing herself against the wall as far back as she could get. The space was barely large enough, and old splinters dug into her back, but she could see a sliver of the cabin through the gaps in the broken wood. Silas positioned himself against the wall beside the door, his empty revolver held ready. From Maylene's hiding spot, he looked like a man preparing to die standing up. The voices drew closer, footsteps outside. Then they stopped. "Cabin here," someone called. "Looks abandoned." "Check it anyway," Carson's voice replied. "Be thorough." The door creaked open slowly. A man stepped inside, young, maybe 25, with a rifle held at the ready. He swept the room with quick, nervous movements. His eyes passed right over Maylene's hiding spot without pausing. "Empty?" he called back. "Just old trash and—" Silas moved. Even injured, even weakened from blood loss, He was faster than the young man with the rifle. Silas grabbed the weapon's barrel and yanked it toward the ceiling just as it fired. The gunshot was deafening in the small space. Then Silas drove his elbow into the man's face, and the searcher went down in a heap. "Contact!" Carson's voice shouted from outside. "We got contact!" Silas grabbed the fallen rifle and fired twice through the doorway. Maylene heard someone curse and dive for cover. Then Silas slammed the door shut and shoved the broken chair under the handle, a pathetic barricade that wouldn't hold for 30 seconds. "How many?" Maylene called from her hiding spot. "4, maybe 5. Silas checked the rifle's ammunition. 6 shots left. "That's not enough." "I know." Bullets began punching through the cabin walls. Wood splintered and flew in deadly fragments. Silas dropped to the floor, returning fire through gaps in the wood. The unconscious searcher groaned but didn't wake up. "Come on out, Mercer," Carson shouted. "You're surrounded. Make this easy on yourself." "How about you make it easy on yourself and leave?" Silas called back. "Can't do that. Got a job to finish." More gunfire. The window shattered completely. The stove took a hit that made it ring like a bell. Maylene pressed herself flatter against the floor, heart hammering so hard it hurt. This was how it ended, trapped in a cabin, outnumbered, outgunned. She'd survived one day of freedom before the world dragged her back down. Then she heard it, a sound underneath the gunfire. Water. Maylene looked towards the back corner of the cabin and realized one of the bullets had punctured something. Water was seeping up through the floorboards, slow at first but growing faster. "Silas," she hissed. "The floor." He glanced back and saw what she meant. Understanding crossed his face, followed by something that might have been hope. "There's a spring under this cabin," he said quietly. "Probably why it was built here. That bullet must have broken through to it. Is that good or bad? Depends on whether it floods before they rush us." He fired twice more. "Stay exactly where you are. Don't move no matter what happens." The water kept rising. Within minutes, it had covered the floorboards, soaking into Maylene's already ruined dress. It was ice cold and smelled of minerals. The unconscious searcher's face was half submerged before he finally started to wake up, sputtering and confused. "What the hell?" Carson's voice from outside. "Your floor flooding, Mercer?" "Spring water," Silas called back. "Must have hit it with one of your wild shots. Keep shooting and you'll drown me before you can collect that reward." Silence from outside, then cursing. The gunfire stopped. "All right," Carson said finally. "We're willing to talk terms." "I'm listening." "You send out the woman, we let you go. Simple trade." Silas laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "You think I'm stupid? You'll shoot me the second she's through the door." "Then what do you suggest?" "I suggest you leave before this floor gives way completely, and we all end up in a flooded sinkhole." Silas shifted position as the water reached his waist. "This cabin was built 70 years ago by someone who didn't know what they were doing. Foundations probably rotted through. You keep putting bullets in the walls, the whole thing's coming down." More silence. Maylene could practically hear Carson calculating whether Silas was bluffing. Then the floor made a sound like a tree breaking. The cabin lurched sideways. Maylene grabbed the bed frame as the entire structure tilted at a sickening angle. Outside, men shouted in alarm. The water, no longer spreading evenly, rushed toward the lower corner in a small flood. "Everybody back!" Carson yelled. "The whole thing's collapsing!" The cabin groaned again. More wood splintered. Through the gaps in the walls, Maylene saw the searchers retreating to a safe distance, unwilling to risk being caught in a collapse. Silas used the distraction to grab the unconscious man and drag him toward the door. "When I open this, you count to 10, then you follow me out the back window. Don't stop. Don't look. Just run for the trees." "What about count to 10, then run?" He shoved the door open and threw the unconscious searcher out into the snow, then fired the rifle's remaining rounds wildly in the direction of the search party. Men scattered, seeking cover. Silas turned and ran, limping badly but moving toward the back of the cabin. Maylene counted. 1, 2, 3. Another massive crack from the floor. The cabin tilted further. 4, 5, 6. Silas disappeared through the broken window. 7, 8, 9. Gunshots outside. Carson shouting orders. 10. Maylene pulled herself from under the bed frame and half crawled, half swam through the water toward the window. Her ankle screamed protest. Her hand slipped on wet wood. But she made it to the opening and pulled herself through just as the cabin floor gave way completely behind her. She landed in snow up to her chest and didn't stop moving. Ahead, she could see Silas already 20 yards into the tree line, moving impossibly fast for a wounded man. Behind her, the cabin collapsed inward with a sound like the world breaking. Men shouted. Someone fired a shot that went wide. Then the trees swallowed her, and she was running through forests that looked identical in every direction. Branches tore at her face. Her ruined ankle sent pain shooting up her leg with every step. But she kept going, because stopping meant dying. She found Silas leaning against a pine tree, breathing hard, his face gray with pain. "Did they follow?" he gasped. Maylene looked back, saw nothing but trees and snow. Heard distant voices, but couldn't tell which direction they came from. "I don't know." "Then we keep moving." He pushed away from the tree and stumbled forward. "There's a ridge 2 miles east. If we can reach it before dark, there's caves, places to hide." "You're bleeding again." "I know." They walked for hours. Maylene lost track of time, lost track of direction, lost track of everything except putting one foot in front of the other. The forest became a blur of white and brown and gray. Her ankle went from screaming to numb to something beyond pain that felt like her entire leg was on fire. Silas was in worse shape. Blood soaked through his coat again, and he was leaning on trees more with each stop. But he never complained, never suggested giving up. Just kept moving with the determination of a man who'd decided to survive out of pure spite. Finally, when the sun was starting to set and Maylene was certain her body couldn't take another step, the ridge appeared through the trees. It was a massive wall of stone rising straight up from the forest floor, honeycombed with openings that might have been caves. Some were barely large enough for an animal. Others looked like they could swallow a house. Silas led her to one of the middle-sized openings, about 6 feet high and maybe 10 feet deep. The interior was dry and showed signs of previous occupation. Old fire marks on the stone. A few scattered animal bones. "Home sweet home," Silas muttered, before collapsing against the back wall. Maylene sank down beside him, too exhausted to even check his wounds. They sat in silence while darkness fell outside and the temperature dropped. "Why?" Maylene finally asked. "Why what? Why risk all this? Why help me at all?" She looked at him. "You could have walked away in that square, could have left me tied to that chair and gone on with your life. But you didn't, and now you're bleeding and hunted and probably going to die in a cave with a woman you don't even know. So why?" Silas was quiet for a long time, so long that Maylene thought he wasn't going to answer. Then, "I had a daughter once?" Maylene waited. "She was 7 when the war started, 8 when I left to fight. I told her I'd come back, promised her." His voice was flat, emotionless. "I came back 4 years later and found graves. Sickness had gone through our town while I was gone. Took half the children, including mine." "I'm sorry." "Don't be. Wasn't your fault." Silas shifted position carefully. "Point is, I spent the last 10 years up in these mountains convincing myself I was better off alone. That caring about people just meant losing them. Then yesterday I saw you in that square, and all I could think was that you looked like you'd already lost everything and the world was trying to take the last bit anyway." He turned to look at her directly. "I helped you because someone should have helped my daughter when I wasn't there. Because leaving you would have meant becoming the same kind of man as Gideon, and because—" He stopped, started again. "Because for the first time in 10 years, I felt like maybe I was supposed to still be alive for a reason." Maylene felt tears on her face and didn't bother wiping them away. "I'm not your daughter." "I know that. And I can't replace whatever you lost." "I know that too." Silas closed his eyes. "But maybe you can help me remember what it felt like to be human instead of a ghost hiding in the mountains waiting to die." They sat together while the night deepened and the wind picked up outside. Maylene thought about the family she'd left in China, the promises that had brought her to America, the long chain of failures and cruelties that had led to a punishment chair in Black Creek Ridge. And she thought about this broken man who'd stepped out of a snowstorm and refused to let her die alone. "We're not going to make it, are we?" she asked quietly. "Probably not." Silas opened his eyes and looked at the cave entrance. "Gideon won't stop. He can't. We made him look weak in front of his entire town. Man like that, his authority is all he has. Lose that, he's nothing. So he'll keep hunting. Until one of us is dead, yeah. Maylin pulled her knees to her chest. Then I guess we'd better figure out how to survive. Any ideas? Not a single one. Silas almost smiled. Me neither. They made it through the night by taking turns sleeping and keeping watch. The cave wasn't warm, but it blocked the worst of the wind. When dawn came, they still had no plan and no resources beyond what they carried. But they were alive. That had to count for something. Morning brought no relief. Silas's fever started just after sunrise, a slow burn that turned his skin clammy and made his eyes too bright. Maylin touched his forehead and pulled her hand back from the heat radiating off him. Infection, she said. Figured. Silas tried to sit up straighter and failed. How bad? Bad enough that you need medicine we don't have. Maylin checked his bandages. The makeshift strips of her dress were soaked through with blood and something yellow that made her stomach turn. The wound's going septic. Then I guess we know how this ends. Stop talking like that. I'm being realistic. Silas closed his eyes. You should go. Head north while you still can. I'll just slow you down now. Maylin wanted to hit him. Would have, if he wasn't already dying. I didn't survive 2 days of hell just to watch you give up, so shut up about me leaving and tell me what to do. There's nothing to do. There has to be something. She stood, testing her ankle. Still swollen, still painful, but functional if she didn't push it. That trading post you mentioned, Willowbrook. How far? 8 miles? Maybe 9 from here? Silas opened his eyes. But I can't make it that far. Not like this. Then I'll go alone. They'll recognize you. Not if I'm careful. Maylin was already thinking it through. I'll go at night, stay off the main paths, find medicine and bring it back before they even know I was there. And if you get caught, then we both die instead of just you. At least this way there's a chance. She knelt beside him. You saved my life. Let me try to save yours. Silas studied her face for a long moment. Then he reached into his coat, moving slowly, every motion obviously painful, and pulled out a small leather pouch. Take this. It's not much. Maybe $40. Should be enough for basic supplies and medicine if you're smart about it. Maylin took the pouch. The weight of it felt obscene in her hand. More money than she'd seen in months. I can't. You can and you will. Bicarbolic acid if they have it. Bandages. Whiskey for cleaning the wound. And food. Something that won't spoil. He leaned back against the cave wall. There's a woman who runs the trading post, Martha Holloway. Tell her Silas Mercer sent you. She'll help if she remembers me. And if she doesn't, then lie better than you've ever lied in your life. Maylin waited until midday to leave, giving Silas time to rest while she scouted the area around the cave. The ridge stretched for miles in both directions, offering dozens of hiding spots if he needed to move. She marked the cave entrance in her mind. Third opening from a distinctive split pine tree, about 30 feet up from the forest floor. Before she left, she built up the small fire they'd started using Silas's matches and the driest wood she could find. It wasn't much, but it would keep him from freezing while she was gone. Don't die while I'm away, she said. I'll do my best. Silas managed a weak smile. And Maylin? If something goes wrong, if they catch you or you can't make it back, I'll make it back. But if you don't, I want you to know. He stopped, searching for words. You're braver than you think you are. Stronger, too. Don't let anyone make you believe otherwise. Maylin nodded, not trusting herself to speak, and started down the ridge. The journey to Willowbrook took longer than she'd hoped. Her ankle slowed her down, forcing her to stop and rest every half mile. The terrain was unfamiliar, and without Silas to guide her, she had to navigate by instinct and the position of the sun. Twice she heard search parties in the distance, men calling to each other, horses moving through the forest. Both times she froze and waited until the sounds faded before continuing. Her heart hammered so hard during those moments that she was certain they'd hear it. By the time she saw the trading post, the sun was setting and exhaustion had settled into her bones like a second skeleton. Willowbrook wasn't really a town, just a cluster of buildings around a crossroads where trappers and hunters stopped to resupply. The trading post itself was a large wooden structure with a covered porch and windows that glowed with lamplight. Maylin waited in the trees, watching. A few people moved between buildings, but nobody seemed to be searching for anything. No wanted posters that she could see. No armed men standing guard. She pulled her coat tighter and stepped out of the forest. The walk across the open ground felt like crossing a battlefield. Every eye seemed to track her. Every sound made her want to run. But she kept her head down and her pace steady, just another traveler stopping for supplies. The trading post door opened with a bell's cheerful jingle that made Maylin's teeth ache. Inside, the space was crammed with everything a person might need to survive in the wilderness. Tools, clothing, food, ammunition, medicine, rope, even a few books. The smell of tobacco and leather and coffee filled the air. 3 men stood near the counter talking in low voices. They glanced at Maylin when she entered, their gazes lingering on her face and clothes, then returned to their conversation. Behind the counter stood a woman in her 50s, gray hair pulled back in a practical bun, wearing an apron over a plain brown dress. Her eyes were sharp as she assessed Maylin. "Help you?" the woman asked. Maylin approached the counter, acutely aware of the men watching from the corner of their vision. "I need medical supplies, carbolic acid, bandages, whiskey." "Someone hurt?" "My husband. Cut himself badly while hunting." The lie came easier than Maylin expected. "We're camped a few miles north. He's too stubborn to see a doctor." The woman's expression didn't change. "Most men are." She started pulling items from shelves behind her. "Bandages I got plenty of. Carbolic acid, too. Whiskey's extra." "That's fine." "You got money to pay for all this?" Maylin placed 2 coins on the counter. The woman looked at them, then at Maylin's face again. "You're that Chinese girl from Black Creek Ridge," she said quietly. Everything inside Maylin went cold. The men's conversation stopped. In the sudden silence, Maylin heard her own heartbeat like drums. "I don't know what you mean," she managed. "Yeah, you do." The woman leaned forward. "Word's been traveling for 2 days now. Marshal Gideon's offering $200 for information leading to the capture of a Chinese woman and a mountain man named Silas Mercer. Says they murdered a lawman and stole property." "That's a lie." The words escaped before Maylin could stop them. "Probably is. Gideon's been known to bend the truth when it suits him." The woman, Martha Holloway, Maylin realized, crossed her arms. "Question is, what am I supposed to do about you standing in my store?" The 3 men at the corner had turned fully now, hands drifting toward weapons. Maylin calculated the distance to the door. Too far. She'd never make it. "Silas said you might help," Maylin said desperately. "Said to mention his name, that you'd remember him." Martha's expression flickered. "Silas is the one hurt?" "Bullet wound, going septic. He'll die without medicine." "Where is he?" "I'm not telling you that." "Smart girl." Martha looked at the men. "You 3 get out." "Martha, there's a reward," one of them started. "I said get out." Martha's voice carried the kind of authority that came from years of running a business in rough territory. "This is my store, and I decide who gets turned in and who doesn't. Now leave before I decide you're not welcome here anymore." The men exchanged glances but left, the door's bell jingling cheerfully behind them. Through the window, Maylin watched them gather outside, talking and gesturing. "They'll ride to Black Creek Ridge," Martha said. "Tell Gideon you're here. You've got maybe 2 hours before this place is crawling with armed men." "Then why help me at all?" "Because Silas Mercer saved my son's life 8 years ago when nobody else would." Martha started packing supplies into a canvas bag. "Boy got lost in the mountains during a bad storm. Silas found him half frozen and carried him back here on his shoulders. Wouldn't take payment, wouldn't even stay for coffee. Just handed over my boy and disappeared back into the wilderness." She pushed the bag across the counter along with Maylin's coins. "Keep your money. You'll need it more than I do." Martha pulled out a hand-drawn map and marked a spot with a pencil. "There's a cabin here, about 12 miles northwest. Been abandoned for years, but the structure's sound and there's a root cellar that stays dry. Take Silas there. Hole up until the search dies down." "Why would the search die down?" "Because Gideon can't keep men out here forever. Eventually they'll give up and go home. Might take weeks, might take months. But if you're smart and stay hidden, you'll outlast them." Martha folded the map and added it to the bag. "There's enough supplies here for a week. After that, you're on your own." Maylin took the bag, overwhelmed. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. You've still got to make it back to wherever you left Silas alive." Martha glanced toward the window where shadows moved outside. Back doors through the storage room. Follow the creek northwest and you'll hit the cabin by morning if you push hard. Maylene started toward the back, then stopped. Those men outside. Will they hurt you for helping us? They'll try to make me tell them where you went. I'll tell them I sent you east toward the territorial line. Martha smiled grimly. Won't be the first time I've lied to protect someone who deserved it. The back door led into a narrow alley between buildings. Maylene slipped out into the gathering darkness and started running. She made it maybe a mile before she heard horses behind her. The riders came fast, at least 4 of them based on the sound. Maylene left the trail and plunged into the forest, the bag of supplies clutched against her chest. Branches tore at her face and clothes. Her ankle screamed, but she kept moving because stopping meant capture, and capture meant death. I see her, someone shouted. There, in the trees. Gunshots cracked through the night. Bullets thudded into tree trunks around her. Maylene zigzagged, using the forest for cover, but she was too slow, too injured. They were gaining. She burst out of the tree line and found herself at the edge of a ravine. Below, a river churned white over rocks, maybe 30 feet down. Behind her, the horses crashed through undergrowth. No choice. Maylene jumped. The fall lasted forever and no time at all. She hit the water hard enough to knock the air from her lungs, and the current grabbed her immediately. The bag of supplies ripped from her hands. The river was ice-cold and impossibly strong, pulling her under, spinning her until she didn't know which way was up. Her head broke the surface. She gasped for air and got half water instead. The current slammed her against a rock, and pain exploded through her shoulder. Then she was under again, tumbling through darkness that tasted like minerals and death. When she finally managed to grab onto a fallen tree trunk, she'd traveled maybe half a mile downstream. Her entire body shook from cold and shock. The bag was gone. The map was gone. Everything Martha had given her was somewhere in the river or smashed against rocks. But she was alive. Maylene pulled herself onto the riverbank and lay there gasping, listening to the riders searching upstream. They hadn't seen her jump. Thought she was still in the forest somewhere. Their voices grew fainter as they moved in the wrong direction. She waited until she couldn't hear them anymore, then forced herself to stand. The moon had risen, casting everything in silver light. Maylene had no supplies, no map, no idea where she was. Her body temperature was dropping fast from the river. She needed to find shelter or she'd die of exposure before sunrise. Then she remembered what Martha had said. Follow the creek northwest. This river had to feed into that creek eventually, and if she followed it upstream instead of down, she might find the cabin Martha mentioned. Might. Maylene started walking. The night became a blur of cold and pain and determination. She fell twice, too numb to feel her feet. Lost the trail 3 times and had to backtrack. The moon set and plunged everything into darkness so complete she had to navigate by touch. But she kept moving. Somewhere around what she guessed was 3 in the morning, she found the creek, smaller than the river, running clear over smooth stones. And following it northwest, just as the sky began to lighten with the promise of dawn, she found the cabin. It was larger than the one they'd fled from, 2 rooms instead of 1, with a stone chimney and shuttered windows. The door was locked, but the wood was old enough that one hard kick broke the latch. Inside, the cabin was dusty but dry. Someone had lived here once and left in a hurry. There was still furniture, a table and chairs, a bed frame with a moth-eaten mattress. And in the root cellar Martha had mentioned, Maylene found jars of preserved food, a few blankets sealed in wax paper, and a small box containing flint and steel. She wanted to collapse, wanted to sleep for a week and wake up somewhere warm and safe. But Silas was still in that cave, dying. Maylene forced herself to inventory everything useful, the preserved food, mostly vegetables and some kind of meat that might be venison. The blankets, a rusted knife, a length of rope, not much, but more than nothing. She took what she could carry and started back toward the ridge. The journey to Silas's cave took most of the day. Maylene had to navigate by memory and guesswork, and twice she got turned around completely. By the time she spotted the split pine tree, the sun was setting again and she was running on nothing but willpower. She climbed to the 3rd cave opening and found it empty. Panic hit her like a physical blow. The fire had burned out. Silas's coat was gone. Blood stained the cave floor, but Silas himself was nowhere to be seen. "No," Maylene whispered. "No, no, no! Looking for someone? She spun around. Silas stood at the cave entrance, leaning heavily on a makeshift crutch fashioned from a tree branch. His face was gray and covered in sweat, but he was alive and conscious. You scared me half to death, Maylene snapped, relief making her angry. Back at you. Thought they'd caught you. Silas lowered himself carefully to sit. Where's the medicine? Lost. The supplies, too. Everything. Maylene sat beside him and explained what had happened. Martha's help, the chase, the river, finding the cabin. Silas listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. You jumped into a river in the middle of winter to escape armed men, he said finally. Survived. Found a cabin with supplies. And made it back here. He shook his head slowly. You're either the luckiest person alive or too stubborn to know when to die. I learned from you. Fair point. Silas shifted position with a grimace. The fever broke this morning. Wound still bad, but I managed to clean it with snow and whiskey I'd forgotten in my coat pocket. Won't cure the infection, but it might buy us time. How much time? Maybe a week, maybe less. He looked at her directly. But we've got shelter now, food, a chance to actually plan instead of just running. That's more than we had yesterday. They moved to the cabin the next morning. Silas could barely walk, even with the crutch, and Maylene had to support most of his weight during the journey. It took 3 times as long as it should have, but eventually they made it. The cabin became their world. Maylene cleaned Silas's wounds as best she could with boiled water and strips torn from the preserved blankets. The infection didn't heal, but it didn't get worse either, holding in some terrible equilibrium that could tip either way at any moment. Days blurred together. They rationed the preserved food carefully, making it last. Silas taught Maylene how to set snares for rabbits and how to identify edible plants even in winter. She taught him a song her mother had sung in China, and he taught her how to clean and maintain the rifle they'd taken from the searcher back at the flooded cabin. At night, they talked. Silas told her about the war. Not the glory stories people like to hear, but the real ones. Watching men die slowly from infected wounds, burning entire towns on orders he knew were wrong, coming home to find everything he'd fought for was already gone. Maylene told him about China, about a family that had owned land for generations until the wrong political alliance destroyed them overnight. About a father who sold everything for passage to America and died on the boat before seeing it. About a mother who'd followed a year later and disappeared somewhere in San Francisco, leaving Maylene alone with promises from men who saw her as nothing more than cheap labor or worse. We're quite a pair, Silas said one night. 2 people who lost everything trying to figure out how to keep existing. Is that what we're doing? Maylene asked. Just existing? What else is there? She didn't have an answer. On the 8th day, Gideon found them. Maylene woke to the sound of horses outside. Through the window, she saw at least a dozen riders surrounding the cabin, more men than had been chasing them before. Gideon sat at the center, his face twisted with the kind of rage that came from 2 weeks of failure and humiliation. Mercer, the marshal shouted. I know you're in there. Come out and face justice. Silas was already awake, the rifle in his hands. How many? He asked Maylene quietly. 12, maybe 15. That's too many. I know. They looked at each other, and in that moment, Maylene saw the same truth reflected in Silas's eyes that she felt in her chest. This was the end. They'd survived longer than expected, but survival had always been temporary. We can surrender, Maylene said without conviction. He'll hang us both. Silas checked the rifle's ammunition. Or worse. Then we fight. We'll die. Better than giving up. Maylene picked up the rusted knife from the cabin's inventory. It wasn't much, but it was something. You said I was braver than I thought. Let's find out if you were right. Silas almost smiled. Then he called out to Gideon. You want us? Come and get us. The answer was gunfire. Bullets shattered the windows and punched through the walls in a coordinated assault. Silas and Maylene dropped to the floor as wood splintered around them. The noise was deafening, a constant roar of weapons firing from multiple angles. Silas returned fire through the broken windows, each shot deliberate. Men outside cursed and scattered. Someone screamed, hit, though Maylene couldn't tell how badly. Then the cabin's door exploded inward. 2 men rushed through, guns raised. Silas shot the first one in the chest before he'd taken 3 steps. The second one got a shot off that went wide. And then Maylene was on him with the knife, driving it into his shoulder with all her strength. The man howled and backhanded her across the face. Stars exploded in her vision. She hit the floor hard, and the man raised his gun to finish her. Silas's rifle butt caught him across the temple. The man went down and didn't move. "You all right?" Silas asked, pulling Maylene to her feet. "Fine." Her face throbbed, but nothing felt broken. "How many bullets left?" 4. Outside, Gideon was shouting orders. More men approached the cabin from different angles. This wasn't a siege anymore. It was an execution by overwhelming force. A bottle crashed through the window with a burning rag stuffed in its neck. Fire spread across the floor almost instantly. "Out the back," Silas said. "Now." They ran for the cabin's rear room while flames consumed the front. More bottles came through windows, more fire spreading faster than seemed possible. The cabin filled with smoke that burned Maylene's lungs and made her eyes stream. The back door was locked from the outside. They'd never bothered to check. Silas shot the lock off with his second-to-last bullet, and they burst out into daylight and gunfire. Men waited there too, 3 of them, guns raised. Silas fired his last bullet and hit one man in the leg. Then he swung the empty rifle like a club, catching another across the face. Maylene grabbed a piece of firewood from the pile outside and drove it into the third man's stomach before he could shoot. They ran. Behind them, the cabin was fully engulfed now, flames reaching toward the sky. Men poured around both sides of the burning structure. Gideon's voice rose above the chaos. "Don't let them reach the trees!" But they did reach the trees, barely, with bullets cutting the air around them. Maylene's lungs burned worse than the cabin. Her ankle finally gave out completely, and she went down hard. Silas grabbed her, pulled her up, half-carried her deeper into the forest while men crashed through undergrowth behind them. They weren't going to make it. Even Maylene could see that now. There were too many pursuers, and they were both too injured, too exhausted, too done. Then the forest opened onto a cliff edge. Below, maybe 40 feet down, a river churned white through a narrow gorge. Not the same river Maylene had jumped into before. This one was deeper, faster, more violent. "We jump, we die," Silas said. "We stay, we die," Maylene replied. Footsteps behind them, getting closer. Gideon's voice. "Got them cornered. Move in." Silas took Maylene's hand. "You trust me?" "Not even a little bit." "Good. Don't." They jumped together. The fall was nothing like before. Longer, more terrifying. Maylene had time to understand that she was going to die, and instead of fear, she felt something like relief that at least it would be over. Then the water hit them like a wall. The current ripped Maylene away from Silas immediately. She tumbled through water so cold it stopped her heart, broke the surface and gasped for air before going under again, slammed into a rock that might have broken ribs, spun through rapids that felt designed specifically to drown her. Then somehow, impossibly, her feet touched bottom in a shallow section. She stood, gasping, and saw Silas surface 20 yards downstream. They'd survived, again. Maylene looked up at the cliff where Gideon and his men stared down at them. Even from this distance, she could see the marshal's face twisted with frustration. "Did they make it?" someone asked. "Doesn't matter," Gideon replied, his voice carrying over the water. "Nobody survives those rapids. The river will finish what we started." The men began to turn away, satisfied. Maylene wanted to scream up at them, wanted to tell them she was still alive, still fighting, still refusing to die just because it would be convenient for them. But Silas caught her eye and shook his head. "Let them think we're dead." They floated downstream until the cliff disappeared behind trees, then dragged themselves onto the bank. For a long time, they just lay there in the mud, breathing. "We can't keep doing this," Maylene finally said. "I know. We need to disappear. Actually disappear. Find somewhere they'll never look and stay there until everyone forgets we existed." "I know a place," Silas said quietly. "North of here, settlement called Copper Hollow. People there don't ask questions. Don't turn anyone away who needs help. If we can reach it, how far? 3 days' walk. Maybe 4 in our condition." Maylene looked at the forest stretching endlessly in every direction. Looked at Silas, barely conscious, his infection probably worse from the river. Looked at her own hands, cut and bleeding and shaking. "Then we'd better start walking," she said. They helped each other stand and started north, leaving behind the burning cabin and the men who thought they'd won. Behind them, smoke rose into the sky like a signal that two people had died in the wilderness. Ahead of them, somewhere beyond the mountains, lay a valley that might offer something neither of them had experienced in years. Peace. If they could survive long enough to find it. They walked for 3 days through terrain that seemed designed to kill them. Silas's fever came back with a vengeance on the second day, turning his skin hot enough that Maylene could feel it through his clothes when she helped him walk. He didn't complain, just kept putting one foot in front of the other with the grim determination of a man who'd decided dying was inconvenient. Maylene wasn't in much better shape. Her ankle had swollen to the point where her boot cut into the flesh, and every step sent pain shooting up her leg that made her vision blur. The river had left her with bruises that painted her entire left side in shades of purple and yellow. She'd lost count of how many times she'd fallen, but they kept moving. On the morning of the 4th day, they crested a ridge and saw the valley below. Copper Hollow sprawled across the landscape like something out of a dream Maylene had forgotten she'd had. Maybe 30 buildings clustered along a river that ran clear over smooth stones. Smoke rose from chimneys. Gardens, still brown from winter but showing signs of early spring preparation, stretched behind houses. In the distance, she could see people moving between structures, going about their lives like the world wasn't full of men with guns and hatred. "That's it," Silas said, his voice rough. "That's Copper Hollow." "It looks normal," Maylene said stupidly. "That's the point. Normal people living normal lives and minding their own business." He swayed slightly, and Maylene caught him before he fell. "We just have to make it down this ridge." The descent took another hour. Halfway down, Silas's legs gave out completely. Maylene managed to lower him to the ground before he collapsed, but she couldn't get him back up. His fever had spiked so high, he was barely conscious. "Silas!" She shook his shoulder gently. "We're almost there. Just a little further." "Can't," he mumbled. "Go without me." "Like hell." Maylene looked at the valley below, then at Silas, then back at the valley. She couldn't carry him, could barely walk herself. But leaving him here meant he'd die, and after everything they'd survived, that wasn't acceptable. She started screaming, "Help! Someone help us! Please!" Her voice echoed across the valley. She screamed until her throat was raw, until she tasted blood, until she had no air left in her lungs. Then she saw them, 3 people running up the ridge toward them. 2 men and a woman, moving fast. The woman reached them first. She was maybe 40, with strong hands and eyes that assessed the situation in seconds. "What happened?" "Bullet wound," Maylene gasped. "Infection. He's been fighting it for days, but—" "Thomas, Henry, get him up." The woman was already helping Maylene to her feet. "I'm Sarah Chen. We'll get you both to the doctor." "Are you—" Maylene started to ask if Sarah was Chinese, but the world tilted sideways and the question disappeared. The next few hours existed in fragments, being half carried down the ridge, a building that smelled like herbs and something antiseptic, hands removing her boots, gentle but efficient, someone washing her feet in warm water that stung so badly she cried. Then darkness. When Maylene woke, she was in a bed, an actual bed with clean sheets and a pillow, and a blanket that didn't have holes in it. Sunlight streamed through a window, and for a terrible moment she thought she'd died, and this was some kind of afterlife. "You're awake." Sarah Chen sat in a chair beside the bed, a cup of something hot in her hands. "Good." The doctor was starting to worry. Maylene tried to sit up and immediately regretted it. Every muscle in her body screamed protest. "Easy," Sarah said. "You've been asleep for almost 2 days. Your body needed it." "Silas," Maylene managed. "Where's the man you came in with? He's alive. Barely." Doctor removed some infected tissue and dosed him with enough carbolic acid to kill a horse. Fever broke last night. Sarah handed Maylene the cup. "Drink this. It's willow bark tea. Helps with pain." Maylene drank. It tasted terrible, but she didn't care. "Where are we?" "My house. You and your friend needed somewhere to recover, and I had room." Sarah leaned back in her chair. "Want to tell me what you two were running from?" Maylene's hand tightened on the cup. "We weren't. Don't lie. You showed up half dead with infected wounds, wearing clothes that had been through hell, and you both flinched every time someone made a sudden noise the first day. Sarah's voice wasn't unkind. Everyone in Copper Hollow is running from something. We don't judge, but we also don't harbor criminals who've hurt innocent people. So I'm asking straight, what did you do? I stole garbage, Maylene said quietly. Food scraps from behind a stable, because I was starving, and the town decided that deserved a public whipping. Sarah waited. Silas stopped them. Cut me loose. We ran. They called it assault on a lawman and put a price on both our heads. Maylene met Sarah's eyes. We didn't murder anyone, didn't rob anyone. We just refused to let them kill us for being inconvenient. And the wounds? They shot at us, chased us through the wilderness, burned down a cabin while we were inside. We jumped off a cliff into a river because it was either that or let them execute us. Maylene's voice cracked. We're not criminals. We're just people who wanted to survive. Sarah was quiet for a long moment. Then she nodded. All right. All right. I believe you. Sarah stood. Get some rest. When you're strong enough to walk, we'll talk about what happens next. Maylene spent the next week recovering in Sarah's house. The doctor, a gruff man named William Morrison, who'd apparently served as a field surgeon during the war, checked on her daily. He cleaned and rebandaged her ankle, gave her salves for the bruises, and tisked disapprovingly at the state she'd let herself get into. You're lucky you didn't lose the foot, he said during one visit. Another few days and the infection would have spread to the bone. I was a little busy staying alive, Maylene replied. Morrison almost smiled. Fair enough. Silas recovered more slowly. Maylene wasn't allowed to see him for the first 3 days while Morrison worked to save his life. When she finally got permission to visit, she found him in a room down the hall, awake but looking like he'd been through a war. You look terrible, she said from the doorway. You should see the other guy. Silas's voice was weak but steady. Morrison says I'll live, though he also says I'm too stubborn to know when to die properly. He's not wrong. Maylene sat in the chair beside his bed. How do you feel? Like I got shot, chased through the wilderness, and jumped off a cliff. He turned his head to look at her. But alive. So I'll take it. They sat in comfortable silence for a while. Through the window, Maylene could see people going about their daily lives in Copper Hollow. A woman hanging laundry, 2 men repairing a fence, children running between houses, their laughter carrying on the breeze. It's real, Silas said quietly. This place. I wasn't sure it would still be here. You've been here before? Once. Years ago. Right after... He trailed off, but Maylene understood. Right after he'd lost his daughter. Right after he'd run to the mountains to die slowly instead of all at once. What made you leave? She asked. Didn't think I deserved peace. Silas looked back at the ceiling. Thought if I stayed somewhere nice, I'd just ruin it. Safer for everyone if I disappeared into the wilderness. And now? Now I'm too tired to keep running. He glanced at her. What about you? You planning to stay? Maylene thought about Black Creek Ridge, about the punishment chair and the whip and the hatred in people's eyes, about 3 months of barely surviving in a town that treated her like a disease. I don't know, she said honestly. I don't know if anywhere is safe for someone like me. Someone like you? Chinese, foreign, a woman with no husband and no family and no protection. Maylene stood and walked to the window. The world has made it very clear that people like me don't belong anywhere. Maybe the rest of the world, but here? Silas's voice was gentle. Sarah Chen is Chinese, so is at least one other family I saw. And nobody seemed to care. Maylene turned to look at him. That's different. They probably have husbands, status, money. Sarah's a widow, has been for 6 years, runs her own business trading with trappers. Silas shifted position carefully. And the Tanaka family down by the river, they're Japanese, came here after some trouble in California. Nobody asked them to prove they belonged. They just built a house and started living. Why? Because Copper Hollow was built by people who got thrown away by everywhere else. Outlaws who wanted to go straight. Widows with nowhere to go. Families who didn't fit in normal towns. He closed his eyes. It's not perfect. Still has problems, still has people who don't always get along. But it's a place where you're judged by what you do, not what you look like or where you came from. Maylin wanted to believe him, wanted it so badly it hurt. What if they find us? She asked. Gideon and his men. What if they come here? Then the people of Copper Hollow will make a choice. Silas opened his eyes again. Same choice every community makes when outsiders come looking for their own. Do they stand together or do they fold? 2 weeks after their arrival, that choice came. Maylin was helping Sarah in her garden when a boy came running down the main road shouting, "Riders! Armed riders from the south!" The settlement moved with practiced efficiency. Men grabbed rifles from their homes. Women ushered children inside. Sarah stood up, dirt on her hands, and looked at Maylin. "That them?" "Probably," Maylin said, her heart racing. "Then we'd better go see what they want." The riders, 6 of them, stopped at the edge of town. Gideon sat at the center looking older than Maylin remembered. The 2 weeks of chasing ghosts through the wilderness had carved new lines into his face. A crowd gathered to meet them. Maybe 20 people from Copper Hollow, standing together in a loose formation that wasn't quite threatening but wasn't welcoming either. Maylin stood near the back with Sarah, trying to make herself invisible. "Afternoon," said a tall man Maylin had learned was the settlement's unofficial leader, a former cavalry officer named Jacob Reeves. "What brings you to Copper Hollow?" "Hunting fugitives," Gideon replied. "A Chinese woman and a mountain man, wanted for assault on a peace officer and theft. We have reason to believe they might have come this way." "That's so." Jacob's tone was carefully neutral. "What makes you think that?" "Tracks led north. This is the only settlement within 50 miles. Gideon's eyes scanned the crowd, and Maylin tried to shrink further behind Sarah. "We're prepared to offer a reward for information leading to their capture." "How much?" someone asked. $200, each. A murmur ran through the crowd. $400 was more money than most people saw in a year. "Describe these fugitives," Jacob said. Gideon did, and his description was accurate enough that Maylin felt her stomach drop. He knew what they looked like, knew their names. If anyone in this crowd decided $400 was worth more than principal, it was over. Jacob listened without interrupting. When Gideon finished, he looked back at the gathered settlers. "Anyone here seen people matching that description?" Silence. Maylin held her breath. "Nobody," Gideon pressed. "You're certain?" "We get a lot of travelers through here," Jacob said. "People come and go. Don't always catch their names or stories. But I can tell you this. If there were wanted criminals in Copper Hollow, we'd know about it. We look out for each other here. Then you won't mind if we search." "Actually, I would mind." Jacob's voice stayed level, but something hardened in his posture. "This is private property. A community of law-abiding citizens. You've got no jurisdiction here, Marshal. No warrant. No proof of anything except a hunch." Gideon's face darkened. "I'm a territorial marshal. My jurisdiction extends to enforcing actual laws, not hunting people because they made you look bad." The voice came from the crowd. William Morrison, the doctor, stepping forward. "I know who you are, Gideon. Knew your father, too. He was a bastard who wore a badge like it gave him the right to hurt people, and from what I'm seeing, the apple didn't fall far. You got no right. I've got every right. This is my home. These are my neighbors, and you're not welcome here." Other voices joined in, backing Morrison up. The crowd shifted, and suddenly it wasn't just Jacob standing between Gideon and the town. It was everyone. Gideon's hand drifted toward his gun, and the entire crowd tensed. "I wouldn't," Jacob said quietly. "You're outnumbered 6-20, and unlike you, every person standing here actually knows how to shoot." For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Gideon smiled, that terrible smile Maylin remembered from the square in Black Creek Ridge. "This isn't over." "Yeah, it is." Jacob's voice was flat. "Those people you're hunting, even if they were here, which I'm not saying they are, they'd be under our protection. And if you try to take them, you'll start a fight you can't win. You're harboring fugitives. We're protecting our own. There's a difference." Jacob gestured toward the road. "Now I'm going to ask you politely to leave. And if you don't leave politely, we'll make you leave the other way." Gideon looked like he wanted to argue, wanted to fight, wanted to drag Maylin and Silas out by force and make them pay for every humiliation of the past 2 weeks. But he wasn't stupid. 6 men against an armed settlement was suicide. "You'll regret this," he said. "Maybe." But not today. Jacob didn't move. Ride out, Marshal, and don't come back. Gideon yanked his horse's reins and turned. His men followed, and together they rode back south, disappearing into the trees. The crowd didn't disperse until they were completely out of sight. Then Jacob turned and looked directly at Maylene. You two should probably come out of hiding now. Maylene stepped forward, heart pounding. You knew? Sarah told me the day you arrived, told the council too. Jacob's expression was unreadable. We had a vote. Unanimous decision to offer you protection if trouble came looking. Why? Maylene couldn't understand it. You don't know us. Don't know if we're telling the truth. $400. $400 isn't worth becoming the kind of people who throw wounded strangers to wolves. Jacob looked at the gathered settlers. We've all been where you are, running from something, looking for somewhere to disappear. This valley gave us that chance. Seems only right we pass it along. Sarah put a hand on Maylene's shoulder. Welcome home. The words broke something inside Maylene that had been holding together through sheer force of will. She started crying and couldn't stop, great shaking sobs that felt like they were tearing her apart from the inside. Sarah held her while she cried. The crowd dispersed quietly, giving her privacy for the breakdown she'd been delaying for weeks. When Maylene finally got control of herself, she found Silas standing at the edge of the gathering. He was still weak, still using a crutch, but he'd insisted on being there when Gideon arrived. They chose us, Maylene said, wiping her face. Yeah. Silas looked at the road where Gideon had disappeared. Now we just have to make sure that choice doesn't get them killed. The council met that night in Jacob's house. Maylene and Silas were invited, expected, actually, to attend. 12 people sat around a large table, representing different families and interests in the settlement. Jacob presided over the meeting with the casual authority of someone who'd led men in worse circumstances. Gideon's not going to give up, Jacob said without preamble. Man like that, pride's all he has. We embarrassed him today. He'll come back with more men, better prepared. Let him come, said a woman named Margaret Dunn. We defended our own before. We can do it again. Can we? Morrison leaned forward. We've got maybe 40 adults who can shoot. He could bring 100 men if he's determined enough. Professional gunfighters, bounty hunters, people who kill for money and don't care about principles. So what do you suggest? Sarah asked. We throw Maylene and Silas out? Hope that satisfies him? No, but we need to be realistic about what we're facing. The argument went back and forth. Some wanted to prepare for a siege. Others suggested sending word to territorial authorities about Gideon's abuse of power. A few thought maybe Maylene and Silas should leave voluntarily, not to satisfy Gideon, but to protect the settlement. Maylene listened to people debating her life like it was a problem to be solved, and part of her wanted to scream. But another part, the part that had survived Black Creek Ridge, understood. These people had chosen to help her, but that didn't make the consequences go away. There might be another option, Silas said quietly. Everyone turned to look at him. What if we were dead? What? Maylene asked. Think about it. Gideon's hunting us because we're alive. His pride's wounded because we escaped. But if we died, publicly, believably, he could go home satisfied. Case closed. Fugitives dead. His authority restored. You want to fake your deaths, Jacob said slowly. Not just fake them. Make them real enough that nobody questions it. Silas looked around the table. There's a gorge about 10 miles south. Deep, fast water. Lots of people have died there over the years. What if Gideon got word that 2 people matching our description were seen heading that way? What if someone found evidence, blood, torn clothing, maybe a body, that suggested we didn't make it across? That's a lot of maybes, Morrison said. It's better than fighting a war we might lose. Silas met Maylene's eyes. I'm tired of running, tired of looking over my shoulder. This way, we actually get to disappear, become different people, start over for real. Maylene thought about it, about giving up her name, her past, everything she'd carried from China, about becoming someone else entirely. It should have felt like losing. Instead, it felt like freedom. How would we do it, she asked. The plan came together over the next 3 days. It was risky and required perfect timing, but it was possible. They would leave evidence of their presence near the gorge. Silas's distinctive coat, Maylene's torn dress, both soaked in animal blood. a staged campsite showing signs of struggle. Then they'd tip off one of Gideon's informants that two people matching their description had been seen there, heading toward the crossing. When Gideon arrived and found the evidence, he'd have two choices: believe they'd died, or look like a fool for continuing to chase ghosts. His pride would make him choose belief. Meanwhile, Maylene and Silas would stay in Copper Hollow under new names, new identities. Nobody outside the settlement would know they'd survived. "It's not perfect," Jacob warned. "If anyone talks, if someone from the settlement mentions you to an outsider, the whole thing falls apart." "We'll take that risk," Silas said. On the fourth day, they enacted the plan. Sarah and two others rode south with the prepared evidence. They set everything up near the gorge, making it look like two desperate people had tried to cross in the middle of the night and failed. Then they rode to a trading post 40 miles away and casually mentioned to the owner, a known gossip, that they'd seen signs of a tragedy near the gorge. Two bodies swept away by the current. Terrible thing. Nothing to be done about it now. The gossip did what gossips do. Within a week, word reached Black Creek Ridge. 2 weeks after that, a rider came to Copper Hollow. Not Gideon this time, but one of his men. The young searcher Silas had knocked unconscious back at the flooded cabin. Jacob met him at the settlement's edge with the same armed crowd as before. "Message from Marshal Rourke," the rider said. "He wanted me to inform you that the fugitives you were harboring are dead. Found evidence at Devil's Gorge. Bodies washed away, but the blood and clothing were positive identification." "That's so?" Jacob's face showed nothing. "Marshal wanted you to know that your cooperation, or lack of it, has been noted. But since the fugitives are dead, he sees no reason for further action." The rider's tone suggested he was reciting words he'd been told to say. "He hopes there'll be no hard feelings." "You tell the Marshal we appreciate him letting us know," Jacob said. "And you tell him Copper Hollow takes care of its own, dead or alive." The rider left. The crowd waited until he was gone, then erupted into cheers. Malin stood beside Silas in Sarah's doorway, watching the celebration. They were officially dead now. Free from their past, from Gideon's hunt, from everything that had defined them for weeks. "How do you feel?" Silas asked. "Strange," Maylene admitted. "Like I should be relieved, but I'm just empty." "That'll pass. Takes time to figure out who you are when you're not running anymore." "Did you? Figure out who you were?" Silas looked at the people celebrating in the street, people who'd risked everything to protect two strangers because it was the right thing to do. "Starting to." Jacob approached them, grinning. "Well, you two are officially ghosts now. Question is, what do ghosts do with their second chance?" "Live," Silas said simply. "Just live." And for the first time since Maylene had been tied to a chair in Black Creek Ridge, that didn't sound impossible. The settlement gave them the abandoned cabin by the river, smaller than some of the others, but structurally sound. Silas spent his recovery repairing the roof and replacing rotted floorboards. Maylene cleaned years of accumulated dirt and made the space livable. They chose new names. Silas became Samuel Garrett, a carpenter from Montana. Maylene became May Gardner, a widow from San Francisco. Simple identities that wouldn't invite questions. Sarah helped Maylene plant a garden behind the cabin. The soil was good, and spring was coming early. Within a month, they had vegetables starting to sprout and flowers Maylene had grown from seeds Sarah had saved for years. "My mother grew these in China," Sarah said, showing Maylene the delicate blooms. "Brought the seeds with her when she came to America. They're the only thing I have left of her." "Why share them with me?" Maylene asked. "Because gardens shouldn't be kept to one person. They should spread." Sarah smiled. "Besides, you looked like you needed something beautiful to tend, something that wouldn't run away or try to kill you." The flowers bloomed in shades of red and gold that reminded Maylene of home, the home she'd lost in China before everything fell apart. She tended them carefully, and they rewarded her by growing stronger than she'd expected in this strange valley. Silas's carpentry skills made him valuable to the settlement. He built furniture for new arrivals, repaired existing structures, and taught Morrison's son how to work with wood. His hands, which had spent 10 years destroying things and hurting people and barely surviving, remembered how to create. At night, Maylene and Silas would sit outside their cabin and watch the settlement wind down. Lanterns lighting windows one by one. Families gathering for dinner. The normal, peaceful routines of people who weren't running from anything. Think Gideon really believes we're dead? Maylene asked one evening. Don't know. Don't care. Silas carved a piece of wood, letting the shavings fall around his feet. Even if he doesn't, what can he do? He told everyone we died. If he comes back now claiming otherwise, he looks like a fool. His pride won't allow it. So we're really free. As free as anyone gets. Maylene leaned against the cabin wall and looked at the stars beginning to appear overhead. I keep waiting for it to feel real, like I'll wake up and still be in that mining shack, or tied to that chair, or running through the forest. Give it time. Reality takes a while to catch up after you've been running for so long. 2 months after their arrival in Copper Hollow, word came from Black Creek Ridge. The town was collapsing. Without Gideon's iron control he'd taken to drinking heavily after the fugitive case closed, the place had turned on itself. Businesses were failing, families were leaving. The town that had cheered while Maylene suffered was slowly dying. Good, Sarah said when she heard. Place like that deserves to fail. Maylene felt nothing, no satisfaction, no vindication, just a distant observation that the world occasionally balanced itself out. That evening, Silas showed her something he'd been working on in secret. A cradle. Small and simple, but beautifully crafted, with wooden slats smoothed until they felt like silk. I don't understand, Maylene said. You will. Eventually. Silas set it beside the cabin door. For now, it's just a reminder that good things are still possible, that life can be about more than survival. Maylene touched the cradle gently, and something shifted inside her. A hope she hadn't allowed herself to feel. A possibility she'd thought died somewhere in the wilderness. Thank you, she said quietly. For what? For not giving up on me. For stepping out of that snowstorm in Black Creek Ridge when you could have kept walking. For carrying me when I couldn't walk and fighting when I wanted to surrender. She looked at him. For helping me remember what it feels like to be human. Silas was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, I was wrong. Back in that cave when I said I helped you because of my daughter. What do you mean? I mean, I helped you because you deserved help. Because you were brave and stubborn and refused to let the world break you even when it tried its hardest. He met her eyes. My daughter would have liked you, but this isn't about her. This is about you and me and the fact that we somehow survived long enough to find a place worth living in. Maylene kissed him. Not out of gratitude or desperation or because she thought she owed him anything. She kissed him because, in a world that had tried to destroy them both, they'd found each other and refused to let go. When they finally pulled apart, Silas was smiling. A real smile, not the bitter half expressions she'd seen before. So what now? He asked. Now we live, Maylene said. We plant gardens and build furniture and become boring people with boring lives who nobody wants to hunt or hurt or punish. Sounds terrible. Sounds perfect. They stood together outside their cabin while the sun set over Copper Hollow, painting everything in shades of gold and orange. Somewhere far away, men with badges and guns and authority might still be looking for two fugitives who'd embarrassed them. But here, in this valley full of people who'd chosen mercy over money and principle over convenience, those fugitives were dead. And Samuel Garrett and May Gardner were finally impossibly alive. Spring transformed Copper Hollow into something Maylene hadn't known existed outside of childhood memories. The valley exploded with green, trees budding, grass pushing through the last patches of snow, wildflowers carpeting the hillsides in colors so bright they hurt to look at. Her garden thrived. The vegetables she'd planted with Sarah grew strong and healthy, and the flowers from China bloomed in waves of red and gold that made other settlers stop and stare. People started asking for cuttings, for seeds, for advice on how to make things grow in soil they'd never quite mastered. Maylene taught them what her mother had taught her, and in the process, she stopped being May Gardner, the mysterious widow, and became May who knew how to make anything grow. It was a small shift, but it mattered. Silas, Samuel, she had to remember to call him Samuel in public, built a workshop beside their cabin. The sound of his saw and hammer became part of the valley's daily rhythm. He crafted tables and chairs and bed frames that people actually wanted to buy, and slowly their collection of borrowed items was replaced with things he'd made himself. At night, They'd fall asleep exhausted from honest work instead of terror. It took Maylin 2 months to stop waking up at every sound, convinced men with guns were outside. Took Silas even longer to stop reaching for weapons that weren't there. But the nightmares faded, not all at once, but gradually, like winter giving way to spring. 3 months after their arrival, a stranger rode into Copper Hollow. He was young, maybe 30, with the look of someone who'd seen violence but wasn't defined by it. He tied his horse outside Jacob's house and asked politely if the settlement had room for one more resident. The council met that evening to discuss him. His name was Daniel Cross, and he claimed to be a former ranch hand from Wyoming looking for a fresh start. Standard story, nothing suspicious about it, except something about the way he'd looked at Maylin when she'd walked past made her skin crawl. "I don't trust him," she told Silas that night. "Why not?" "The way he watched me, like he was trying to place me." Maylin paced their small cabin. "What if he's seen the wanted posters? What if he knows who we are?" The posters described Maylin Zhao and Silas Mercer, not May Gardner and Samuel Garrett. Silas set down the chair leg he'd been sanding. "And even if he suspects something, what's he going to do? We're supposed to be dead. He'd have to prove otherwise." "I still don't like it." "Neither do I. But we can't run every time someone new shows up. This is our home now. We have to trust that the people here will protect us if it comes to that." The council voted to let Daniel Cross stay on a trial basis. He found work helping with the settlement's livestock and kept to himself mostly. But Maylin noticed the way his eyes followed her when she worked in the garden, the way he'd happened to be nearby when she walked to Sarah's house or the general store. A week after his arrival, he approached her directly. "May, right?" he said, falling into step beside her on the road. "Yes." Maylin kept walking, her muscles tensing. "Beautiful flowers you're growing. Don't see many Chinese varieties this far north. My friend Sarah gave me the seeds." "Sarah Chen, the widow." Daniel smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Interesting that Copper Hollow has so many widows. You, Sarah, Margaret Dunn lost her husband 5 years ago, I hear. Lots of loss in this valley. People come here after they've lost things. That's the point of the place." Maylin stopped walking and faced him directly. "Did you need something, Mr. Cross?" "Just making conversation, getting to know my neighbors." He looked at her garden, then back at her face. "You know, I could swear I've seen you before. Can't quite place where, but your face is familiar." "I have one of those faces." "Maybe, or maybe—" "Is there a problem here?" Silas's voice came from behind them. He stood in the doorway of his workshop, a hammer still in his hand. Daniel's smile widened. "No problem. Just getting acquainted with your wife." "We've been acquainted enough for today." Silas didn't move, but something in his posture changed. "May's got work to do. I'm sure you do too." "Of course," Daniel tipped his hat. "See you around, May." He walked away and Maylin released the breath she'd been holding. "He knows," she said quietly. "Maybe. Probably." Silas watched Daniel disappear around a building. Question is what he plans to do about it. They found out 2 days later when Daniel rode out of Copper Hollow without telling anyone he was leaving. Jacob sent a rider to follow him at a distance, and the report came back that evening. Daniel had ridden straight south, toward Black Creek Ridge. "He's going to tell Gideon," Maylin said at the emergency council meeting. "He figured out who we are, and now he's going to collect the reward." "There is no reward," Morrison pointed out. "You're supposed to be dead. Gideon already closed the case." "But if Daniel tells him we're alive, Gideon will have to do something. His pride won't let him ignore it." Silas looked around the table. "We should leave. Tonight. Before he comes back with armed men." "No." Jacob's voice was firm. "We don't throw people out because of what might happen. That's not who we are." "Then what do you suggest?" Sarah asked. "We wait here for Gideon to show up and start a war." "We prepare for the possibility of a war. But we also prepare for the possibility that Daniel doesn't make it to Black Creek Ridge at all." The room went silent. "Jacob," Morrison said carefully, "what are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting that the trail between here and Black Creek Ridge is dangerous. Lots of places where a man could fall off his horse, hit his head, end up in a ravine." Jacob met everyone's eyes in turn. "I'm not saying we should do anything. I'm saying nature is unpredictable." "You want us to kill him," Maylin said flatly. "I want us to protect our home." Jacob's voice was hard. Daniel made his choice when he decided to betray people who'd shown him hospitality. Whatever happens to him after that is on him. The vote was split. Half the council wanted to send riders after Daniel. The other half argued it made them no better than Gideon, using violence to solve problems. In the end, they decided to wait. Fortify the settlement, prepare for the worst, hope for something better. Daniel didn't make it to Black Creek Ridge. His body was found 3 days later by a trapper, halfway between Copper Hollow and the territorial border. His horse had thrown him on a narrow trail, and he'd fallen badly. Broken neck. Death would have been instant. The trapper brought the news to Copper Hollow, along with Daniel's personal effects. There was a letter in his saddlebag, half-written, addressed to Marshal Gideon Rourke. Jacob burned it without reading it aloud. Accident, he said simply. Tragic, but these things happen in rough country. Nobody asked questions. Nobody investigated. Daniel Cross was buried in a simple grave at the edge of the settlement, and life continued. But Maylin couldn't shake the feeling that nature had been less unpredictable than convenient. "Did we kill him?" she asked Silas that night. "We didn't do anything. But someone did. Someone from the settlement. They followed him, and you don't know that." Silas looked at her steadily. "Could have been exactly what Jacob said. An accident. Happens all the time out here." "You don't believe that any more than I do." Silas was quiet for a long moment. "No, I don't. But I also don't know for certain what happened. And even if I did..." He trailed off. "Even if you did what? We just accept it? Pretend murder is fine as long as it protects us. I'm saying the world isn't as simple as right and wrong. Sometimes it's about choosing which kind of wrong you can live with." Silas's voice was tired. Daniel was going to get us killed. Get this whole settlement destroyed because he wanted reward money. If someone stopped him, whoever they were, they saved lives. Maybe dozens of lives. Does that make it right? No. But does it make it understandable? Yeah, it does. Maylin thought about the people of Copper Hollow, the families who'd welcomed them, the children who played in the streets without fear. Sarah, who'd shared her mother's flower seeds. Morrison, who'd saved Silas's life. If Daniel had reached Gideon, all of that would have burned. "I don't like that I understand it," Maylin said quietly. "Neither do I. But survival isn't about being comfortable with your choices. It's about making them anyway and figuring out how to keep living after." Summer brought new challenges. A drought hit the valley, and the river dropped low enough that irrigation became difficult. Maylin's garden suffered despite her best efforts. Other settlers lost entire crops. Then Sarah's well ran dry. Silas organized a work party to dig a new one, and for 3 weeks men took turns breaking through rock and clay while women managed water rationing for the entire settlement. It was hard work that left everyone exhausted and short-tempered. But nobody starved. Nobody died. The community held together because people chose to help each other instead of hoarding resources. When they finally struck water, the celebration lasted 2 days. Someone brought out a fiddle. Someone else had saved whiskey for a special occasion. People danced in the street like the world hadn't just spent 3 weeks trying to kill them through thirst. Maylin watched from the edge of the celebration, and for the first time since leaving China, she felt like she belonged somewhere. Not because anyone had granted her permission or accepted her conditionally, but because she'd worked and struggled and survived alongside people who valued those things more than the color of her skin or the accent in her voice. "You should dance," Sarah said, appearing beside her with 2 cups of whiskey. "I don't know how." "Then you should learn. Life's too short to stand on the edges watching other people live it." Sarah pulled her into the crowd, and someone showed her the basic steps, and she stumbled through them while people laughed, not at her but with her, the way friends laugh when someone they care about does something awkward but genuine. Silas found her later, sweaty and breathless and grinning. "You're drunk," he observed. "A little." Sarah kept refilling my cup. Maylin leaned against him. "Dance with me." "I don't dance." "Learn." She pulled him toward the music the way Sarah had pulled her. They danced badly, out of rhythm with the music and each other, and Maylin couldn't remember the last time she'd been this happy. Not content, not grateful to be alive, actually happy, in a way that felt almost painful because she'd gone so long without it. That night, lying in bed with Silas's arm around her and the sounds of the celebration finally winding down outside, Maylin let herself think about the future. not as a scary concept to be survived, but as something she might actually get to live. "I want children," she said quietly. Silas's arm tightened around her. "Yeah? Not now. Maybe not for a while, but someday. I want—" She searched for words. "I want to create something that isn't just about surviving. I want to build a life that matters beyond just not dying." "That sounds good. You'd be all right with that? With children?" Silas was quiet long enough that Maylene thought he'd fallen asleep. Then, "I had a daughter once. Lost her. Thought that meant I didn't deserve another chance at being a father." His voice was rough. "But maybe I was wrong. Maybe loss doesn't disqualify you from trying again. Maybe it just teaches you to appreciate what you have while you have it." Maylene turned to face him in the darkness. "I can't replace your daughter." "I know, and I wouldn't want you to. She was her own person, and any children we have will be their own people too." He touched her face gently. "But maybe we can honor her memory by building something good, something that lasts longer than the violence that took her." 6 months later, word reached Copper Hollow that Black Creek Ridge had died completely. The last families had abandoned it, and the town was nothing but empty buildings slowly collapsing into the frontier. Marshal Gideon Rourke was found dead in his office, a bottle of whiskey in one hand and a gun in the other. The official report called it an accident while cleaning his weapon, but the whiskey-soaked letter on his desk suggested otherwise. In it, he'd written about failure, about a town that had trusted him and a system that had abandoned them both, about 2 fugitives who'd made him look like a fool and a pride that wouldn't let him forget it. He'd never mentioned Maylene or Silas by name, just called them the foreign woman and the mountain man who proved I was nothing. Jacob read the letter aloud at a council meeting, and when he finished, he burned it the same way he'd burned Daniel Cross's letter. "That's done then," he said. "No more ghosts hunting you. No more men with badges looking for revenge. You're free. Actually, completely free." Maylene should have felt relief, should have celebrated, but all she felt was a strange emptiness where fear had lived for so long. "He killed himself because of us," she said to Silas that night. "He killed himself because he built his entire identity on power and control, and when he lost both, he had nothing left." Silas's voice was firm. "That's not on us. That's on him and every choice he made that led to that moment. But if we hadn't—" "If we hadn't what? Refused to let him whip you in public? Escaped instead of dying quietly? Survived when he wanted us dead?" Silas took her hands. Gideon had 100 chances to be a better man. He chose cruelty every single time. His death is sad because all death is sad, but it's not your fault. Don't carry that weight. Maylene wanted to argue, wanted to feel guilty because guilt felt more manageable than accepting that sometimes broken people destroy themselves and there's nothing you can do to stop it. But she was tired of carrying weight that wasn't hers. "All right," she said quietly. "All right, I'm letting it go. Gideon, Daniel, all of it." Maylene took a deep breath. "I'm choosing to believe that I deserve this life, this home, these people who protected us. I'm choosing to stop waiting for punishment that isn't coming." Silas pulled her close. "Good, because you do deserve it. You always did." The first snow came early that year, catching everyone by surprise. Maylene's garden died overnight, the flowers she'd tended so carefully turning black and brittle with frost. She stood looking at the ruined blooms and felt tears on her face that she couldn't quite explain. Sarah found her there an hour later, still standing in the frozen garden. "It's just plants," Sarah said gently. "They'll grow back in the spring." "I know, it's not that." Maylene wiped her face. I worked so hard to make them grow, to create something beautiful, and winter came and killed them all, and I couldn't stop it." "No, you couldn't, because that's what winter does." Sarah knelt and started collecting seeds from the dead flowers. "But you can make sure they come back. That's the thing about gardens. They're not about permanence. They're about renewal. Every year you plant and tend and watch things grow and die and grow again. It's the cycle that matters, not any individual bloom." Maylene helped her collect the seeds, and they filled a small cloth bag with promises of next year's garden. That winter was hard. The drought from summer meant food stores were lower than usual. They rationed carefully, but by February people were getting hungry. Silas and 3 other men made a dangerous trip through the mountains to a trading post 60 miles away, bringing back supplies that kept the settlement alive until spring. They lost 2 toes to frostbite and came back looking like they'd aged 10 years, but they'd succeeded. Mylin spent the winter teaching children, something she'd started doing almost by accident when a neighbor asked if she could watch her kids for an afternoon. She taught them numbers and letters, and how to identify plants, how to stay alive in wilderness that didn't forgive mistakes. One of the children, a girl named Emma, who was 7 years old with dark hair and serious eyes, reminded Maylene so much of how she'd been at that age that it hurt. "Why do we have to learn this?" Emma asked during a lesson about edible plants. "We have stores and gardens." "Because stores run out and gardens die, and when they do, you need to know how to survive anyway." Maylene showed her how to identify wild onions. "The world is unpredictable. The only thing you can control is how prepared you are when it tries to kill you." Emma looked at her with those serious eyes. "Were you prepared when the world tried to kill you?" Maylene thought about the punishment chair, the chase through the wilderness, the cabin burning around them while men shot through the walls. "No," she admitted, "I wasn't prepared at all, but I learned fast, and I found people who helped me survive when I couldn't do it alone." "Like Mr. Samuel?" "Yes, like him." "Are you going to get married?" Emma asked with the bluntness of children who hadn't learned social conventions yet. "We already are married," Maylene said, though it was a lie. They'd never had a ceremony, never made it official, just started calling each other husband and wife because it was easier than explaining the truth. "Then why don't you have babies?" Maylene's breath caught. "That's a complicated question." "My mama says you probably can't have them, that some women just can't." Emma said it matter-of-factly, without cruelty. "Is that true?" "I don't know. Maybe." Maylene had wondered the same thing herself. 6 months of sharing a bed with Silas and no pregnancy. It might mean nothing. Or it might mean the years of starvation and trauma had broken something inside her that couldn't be fixed. That night she brought it up with Silas. "Does it matter?" he asked. "I don't know." "Does it?" "Not to me. I love you whether we have children or not." He pulled her close. "But if it matters to you, then we'll figure it out. Maybe it takes time. Maybe we need Morrison to check if something's wrong. Or maybe we're just not meant to have biological children and we find another way." "What other way?" "Adoption. There are always kids who need homes. Or we just keep being the people who teach other people's children and love them the way we'd love our own." Silas kissed her forehead. "Family isn't just blood. It's who you choose and who chooses you back." Spring returned, and with it came Maylene's garden. She planted the seeds they'd saved from the previous year, and they grew even stronger than before. The flowers bloomed in waves of color that made the entire valley look like something out of a painting. And in April, Maylene woke up sick. She threw up every morning for a week before Sarah noticed and sat her down with a knowing look. "How long since your last bleeding?" Sarah asked. Maylene thought about it. 2 months, maybe 3. I thought it was stress or you're pregnant." Sarah smiled. "Congratulations." The news hit Maylene like a physical blow. She'd convinced herself it wasn't possible, that her body was too damaged, that she'd never get to experience this. And now, "I'm pregnant," she whispered. "You're pregnant," Sarah confirmed. Maylene started crying. Not sad tears or scared tears, though there was fear mixed in. These were the kind of tears that came from realizing you'd been given something you'd stopped believing you deserved. Morrison confirmed it 2 days later. The baby would come in late autumn, probably October or November. He gave her a list of things to avoid and things to expect, and assured her that women had been having babies successfully for thousands of years. Silas took the news with quiet joy. He didn't shout or celebrate loudly, just held Maylene for a long time and whispered, "Thank you," like she'd given him something sacred. That night, he brought out the cradle he'd built months earlier, set it beside their bed where they could see it. "You knew," Maylene said. "Somehow you knew this would happen." "I hoped. There's a difference." Silas touched the cradle gently. "But yeah, I hoped." The pregnancy wasn't easy. Maylene was sick constantly for the first 3 months. Her body ached in ways she'd never experienced, and the fear that something would go wrong that she'd lose this the way she'd lost everything else, never completely left her. But the settlement rallied around her. Sarah brought her ginger tea for the nausea. Morrison checked on her weekly. Other women shared stories of their own pregnancies, normalizing the fear and discomfort. And Silas was there for all of it, holding her hair when she was sick, rubbing her back when it hurt, reading to her at night when she couldn't sleep. "You're going to be a good father," she told him one evening. "I'm going to try. That's all I can promise." That's enough. In October, 3 years after Maylene had been tied to a punishment chair in Black Creek Ridge, her daughter was born. The labor was long and painful and terrifying. Maylene was certain she was going to die. The pain was so intense that she begged Morrison to make it stop, to do something, to just let her die if it would end the agony. But Sarah held her hand and told her she was strong enough. And Silas stayed beside her even when Morrison suggested he might want to wait outside like most men did. And finally, after 14 hours that felt like 14 years, a baby's cry filled the cabin. "It's a girl," Morrison announced, placing the tiny screaming creature on Maylene's chest. Maylene looked down at her daughter, red-faced and furious and absolutely perfect, and understood something fundamental about the universe. This was what she'd survived for. Every moment of pain and fear and running and fighting had led to this exact moment. "What will you name her?" Sarah asked. Maylene looked at Silas, who had tears streaming down his face. They discussed names but never settled on one. "Hope," Maylene said. "Her name is Hope." Because that's what she represented. Proof that even after losing everything, even after being hunted and broken and left for dead, new life could still emerge. Beautiful and demanding and full of possibility. Silas held his daughter for the first time with trembling hands, and Maylene watched something in him heal that she'd never seen broken before. The ghost who'd been haunting the mountains for 10 years finally left completely, replaced by a man who had reasons to keep living instead of just reasons not to die. The settlement celebrated Hope's birth the way they celebrated all births, with food and music and genuine joy that another life had begun in their valley. But Maylene saw the extra meaning in their eyes. She and Silas weren't just Samuel and May anymore. They were proof that the settlement's mission worked, that people could run from their pasts and build real futures, that second chances weren't just theoretical. Winter came again, but this time Maylene barely noticed the cold. She was too busy learning how to keep a tiny human alive. Hope was demanding and exhausting, and Maylene loved her with an intensity that was almost frightening. "I didn't know I could feel this much," she told Silas one night while nursing Hope by firelight. "This much love and this much fear at the same time. That's what children do. They make everything matter more." Silas watched his daughter with wonder. Every choice we make now affects her. Everything we build, she'll inherit. That's terrifying and amazing. What kind of world are we giving her? Maylene looked at the cabin around them, simple and warm and safe. Is this enough? It's more than we had, more than most people get. Silas touched Hope's tiny hand. We're giving her a home where she's wanted, a community that will protect her, parents who love her, and each other. That's not nothing. But what about the rest of it? The world outside this valley, the people who hate others for being different, the cruelty and injustice, and we can't fix the whole world, but we can teach her how to navigate it, how to stand up when she sees wrong, how to help others who need it, how to build instead of destroy. Silas met Maylene's eyes. We teach her what we learned, that survival matters, but so does how you survive. That kindness isn't weakness, that refusing to become what hurt you is a victory. Hope grew, slowly at first, then faster than seemed possible. One day she was a newborn who only ate and slept. Then she was smiling, then laughing, then pulling herself up on furniture and demanding to explore every corner of the world she'd been born into. Emma, the girl Maylene had taught, became Hope's unofficial protector. She'd come over after her own schooling and play with the baby while Maylene worked in the garden or helped Silas in the workshop. I'm going to teach her everything, Emma declared, reading and numbers and how to identify plants and how to be brave. That's a lot of responsibility, Maylene said. I know, but you taught me, so now I teach her. That's how it works. And Maylene realized Emma was right. That's exactly how it worked. Knowledge and kindness and strength passed from person to person, generation to generation, creating chains that connected people across time. She thought about her mother, who'd taught her about gardens, about Sarah's mother, who'd saved flower seeds through an ocean voyage and years in a foreign land, about Silas's daughter, who'd died but whose memory had driven him to save a stranger in a snowstorm. All of them lived on in Hope, in the world they were building for her. On Hope's first birthday, the settlement threw a party that lasted all day. Someone had carved a wooden rocking horse. Someone else had sewn a dress. Sarah gave Hope a cutting from the Chinese flowers to be planted when she was old enough to tend her own garden. That evening, Maylene stood on the porch of their cabin watching the celebration wind down. Lanterns glowed in windows across the valley. Smoke rose from chimneys. People walked home to their families, calling goodbyes and making plans for tomorrow. This was peace. Not the absence of conflict. The settlement had plenty of problems and disagreements, but the presence of people choosing to work through those problems together instead of tearing each other apart. Silas joined her on the porch, Hope asleep on his shoulder. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "I'm thinking about the girl who got tied to a chair in Black Creek Ridge, how terrified she was, how certain she was going to die." Maylene leaned against him. "And I'm thinking about how wrong she was, about how much life was waiting on the other side of that fear." "You think she'd be proud of who you became?" "I think she'd be amazed she survived long enough to become anyone at all." Maylene looked at her sleeping daughter. "But yeah, I think she'd be proud. Not because everything worked out perfectly. It didn't. But because we kept fighting when it would have been easier to give up." "We did good," Silas said quietly. "We did." They stood together while the last light faded from the sky and the stars came out overhead. Somewhere far away, there were still towns like Black Creek Ridge. Still men like Gideon who used power to hurt instead of protect. Still systems designed to crush people who didn't fit easily into boxes. But here, in this valley full of broken people who'd chosen to heal together, there was something different, something better. Not perfect, nothing human ever was, but honest and real and worth protecting. Hope stirred in Silas's arms, making the small noises babies make when they're dreaming. Maylene wondered what she was dreaming about, wondered what kind of person she'd become, wondered if she'd ever know how much her existence meant to parents who'd walked through hell to earn the right to hold her. Probably not. Children rarely understood the sacrifices made for them until they had children of their own. But that was all right. That's how it was supposed to work. Each generation taking the gifts they'd been given and using them to build something new. "We should go inside," Silas said. "It's getting cold." "In a minute." Maylene wasn't ready to let go of the moment yet. "I just want to stand here a little longer. Remember what this feels like." "What does it feel like?" "Like home." The word hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Home wasn't the place Maylene had left in China. Wasn't San Francisco or Black Creek Ridge or any of the places that had rejected her. Home was this valley, these people, this man beside her, and this child they'd created together. Home was choosing to stop running and start building. Home was the place where people knew your real story and protected you anyway. Home was what you made when the world gave you nothing, and you refused to accept that as final. They went inside, put Hope in her cradle, fed the fire in the stove, did all the small, ordinary things that made up a life, and outside, Copper Hollow settled into another night, another turn of the wheel, another day survived, and another day coming. The mountains stood eternal around them. The river ran clear and cold. The stars wheeled overhead in patterns older than human memory. And in a small cabin beside the water, two people who'd been thrown away by the world held each other and their daughter and knew, finally, what it meant to be free. Not free from hardship or uncertainty or the basic struggles of existence, but free from the weight of being unwanted, free from the constant fear of punishment for the crime of existing, free to build lives that meant something beyond just survival. Maylene Zhao had died in a river months ago, officially and completely. But May Gardner was alive, deeply, fully, impossibly alive, and that made all the difference.